I didn't know what was in store for me when I crossed the border from Thailand into Laos. Laos wasn't a country you went to without being in Thailand first, and usually the people who went there were guys just wanting to get a new visa from the Thai consulate in Vientiane or Savannakhet. I was going to the one in Vientiane. I needed a new tourist visa so I could stay longer in Thailand. It was quite a long time ago now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Paying for the Laos visa, crossing the border, and going to a hotel not too far away. I went with a group of people. We all used the same agency to help us, so they provided the transportation. I saw a few guys doing it by themselves, and that's what I thought I'd do next time. But I thought the first time, if I used an agent, it would be best. There were 6 of us in the group, and we'd been taken by minibus from Bangkok. It was great to have company, people doing the same thing, but I definitely felt in my own world when we crossed the border. Laos was similar to Thailand, apart from it was far less busy, nowhere near as developed, and a more sleepy and laid-back atmosphere. I immediately thought Laos would be somewhere I would spend a lot more time. I didn't know it then, but I would be back very soon. Those 2 days I was there made me feel like I wasn't really interested in Thailand anymore. Don't get me wrong, I'd loved being in Thailand, but even during this time, Thailand felt like it had been overdone. There was a mixed bag of people in the group that went with me. We all went out on the first evening after submitting the documents at the consulate. Amazing how different people react to being somewhere new. There was a girl in her early 20s going for a tourist visa, but she claimed to be an English teacher. She wasn't provided with a proper visa or work permit, and she hated Laos. There was another guy who liked to feel like he was in charge, like he was in control because he'd been there and done it lots of times before, and he was acting like he knew what he was doing. I politely told the group I was going to go and spend some time back in the hotel because I was tired. I was never really interested in that chit-chat with random people who you may never see again. That was unless they appeared to be someone I could get to know. I liked that place and went for a walk around, but I had no intention of returning to the hotel. But I didn't think I could just say, I'm going to go and have a few beers by myself. I didn't want to appear as being rude. That was when I started to fall in love with Laos. I made it to a place along the Mekong River. Thailand was in plain view on the opposite side, but I didn't feel this urge to go back. I felt at home in Laos in a way I never felt in Thailand. I loved Thailand, but this place felt special, different and unknown. I made it to a bar next to the river. You have to walk upstairs to the bar area. It was made out of wood with a metal tin roof, but the downstairs area was made out of concrete. I'm racking my brains trying to remember what it was called, but I can't for the life of me think about what it was. There was nobody else there, but there was a girl working there who was either the waitress or the bartender, or maybe a mix of both. Nothing like the situation in Thailand, but I loved the way she interacted with me. Nothing like the experiences in Thailand where Thai people had seen it, done it, and were just in the motion. She seemed to be more interested in speaking English with me. And it wasn't a one-off situation because I experienced that when I went to a restaurant for breakfast the following morning while waiting to go and pick up my visa. For some reason, the visa wasn't ready. It was meant to be, but this was one of the rare occasions that the visa agency told me that they had such a backlog that they couldn't get them all done in time, so we'd have to spend another day. This extra day wasn't included as part of the package, so we were asked to pay another amount of money for another night in the hotel. The hotel that the agency arranged was not in a good area. It was a long way from the riverside, so I told them I'd meet them at the consulate the following day. I went to find my own lodgings. I found a place that was a lot more appropriate, and it wasn't more expensive. Maybe $5 more. Perhaps the agency made a profit from the hotel. Not that that matters. But if you're going to Laos, for whatever reason, with an agency, to get a visa, book your own hotel. That would be my advice. What it meant was I had another day in Laos. Unexpected, but I didn't mind. I was actually happy to be there, to be able to spend more time. I found a bar that seemed to have some expats. and I was speaking to them about why they chose to live in Laos. One of them said he was recruited there, a French guy, and another one said that's where his wife was from. He met his wife in Thailand and they moved to Laos. He said he loved it and he'd never go back, would never dream of going back to Thailand. I always like to speak to people who have moved to different places, so I was loving everything about Laos. There was a famous French restaurant that I went to. I wish I knew what it was called, but I can't remember that either. But the food was tremendous, so affordable, cheaper than Thailand, and it was better than a similar French restaurant I'd been to in Bangkok. It's not like I ate that type of food all the time. I love Thai food, but there was nothing like a nice bowl of properly made French onion soup. Every time I went somewhere, it was a restaurant or a bar, I found that the people were different to Thailand. I am not saying anything negative towards Thai people. I love Thai people, they are amazing. But the people in Laos seem to have a lot less experience with Western expats or tourists. That was understandable. The country was nowhere near as visited as Thailand, but I found that made the people not only friendly like they were in Thailand, but more inquisitive, more open, and it wasn't like they were bored of seeing all these foreigners walking around their country. They were excited that the outside world was coming in, and they wanted to get to know about it. That was my experience and the thing that I loved most about Laos. I finished that night in another bar. I've tried hard not to mention beer Lao because that's all anyone seems to talk about when they go to Laos, but it's impossible not to mention it. My favourite beer in the world, and when I was there, it was like 20 baht for a big bottle. You could still use Thai money in Laos as well as kip. The following morning, I went to the consulate to pick up my visa, and I went with the group back on the bus to Bangkok. I'd been living in Thailand for 3 months. It was my plan to spend a year away before returning home. I had enough money to cover that year, more than enough in fact, and I wasn't in Thailand to try and make money or stay there forever. I wanted to experience it before returning home. When I was back in Bangkok, I went to the condo that I'd rented and dropped off my things, and went to a small market close to the On Nut BTS station for something to eat and a few drinks. It was one of my favourite places to go, close to where I lived, and a very local feel, and I really loved it. I had a great time, but I couldn't help but remember Laos. I felt like I knew Thailand even though I'd only been there for 3 months. It was my first time there, and after only spending 3 months, it was nothing really that I felt could improve the experience I'd already had. During those 3 months, I spent most of the time in Bangkok, occasionally going away for a few days. I went to Samui, Phuket, Ayutthaya and Hua Hin, and even back then, when I was there, it felt like it was all touristed out. When I returned to the condo that evening, I'd rented it for a full year, which was going to be my time away, and that involved me having to give them a 2-month deposit. It was the equivalent of about $600. Not a fortune, but I didn't want to lose that. But I did think, would it really matter if I did? If that meant I could go to Laos and spend time there? I thought about it for the next week. I didn't want to get ahead of myself, see if I got back into Thailand. I spent a lot of time on my work project, something I was doing for myself. It wasn't making any money, but that was one of the reasons that I was there. To give time to that and see if I could turn it into something. But when I finished in the evenings, I'd go out, and I feel like if you've been to one bar, you've been to them all. If you've had one plate of street food, you've experienced that, and next time you go, or the following times, you've already had that experience, so it doesn't feel the same anymore. Also, the amount of people there. I decided that I was going to just go and spend time in Laos, because I really loved it there, as I've already mentioned quite a few times. Somehow, the owner of the condo that I lived agreed to give me half my deposit back. That was completely unexpected, but I was very grateful for that. Most of the time, you hear about people not getting their deposits back, I'm told, even if they've come to the end of their lease. The lady who owned the condo was amazing, giving me half the deposit back on the day I moved out. And while that's not relevant to the story, I wanted to mention it because I'm getting bored of people painting Thailand in the same light. Not everybody is the same anywhere in the world, and in Thailand there are some fantastically honest people. This lady was a perfect example of that, and I just hoped she could find someone else to move into the condo as soon as possible, so that she could continue getting the rental income. She definitely deserved it. I decided that I would spend a week going from Bangkok to the border with Laos. Spend the night in a few of the different towns along the way. I wanted to experience towns that weren't on the tourist trail. I spent the first night in Nakhon Ratchasima. It was great, nothing like Bangkok, not touristy at all. If anything, it felt closer to Laos. I stayed 2 nights there instead. I extended my stay because I wanted to see as much of it as I could. Next was Khon Kaen, then Udon, then a night in Nong Khai on the border. Spending that little bit of time in those different towns opened up my eyes to a part of Thailand I didn't even know existed. Interestingly enough, Khon Kaen is where I now live. But back then, I had no inclination whatsoever that I would ever live permanently in this part of the world. For anybody who feels jaded with your typical Bangkok, Phuket, or any other tourist location in Thailand, I would highly recommend giving yourself a bit of time to go to places like this. You'll see the real Thailand, interact with Thai people who are not used to speaking to foreigners. Anyway, that's what it felt like in Laos, and I suppose that's why I was going there. If I had not been to Laos, and for example, I could have gotten my visa in one of these towns, I guess I'd have probably ended up moving there for 3 months instead. But Laos was where I was going, and I wasn't about to change that. After spending the final night in Nong Khai, the following morning I went to the border crossing and exited Thailand. It was quite an annoying experience. How I expected it to be. I mean, I've already done it once by this point and I'm fully aware, but it really was an annoying process. But how I expected it to be was, you exit Thailand on the Thailand side, walk over the bridge, get your visa, and then go to Laos. But it wasn't set up like that. You had to get on a bus to cross the river, and the bus only went at certain times. That meant that a busload of people arrived at the visa counter and immigration at the same time. Not only did you have to wait for the bus, and they didn't go as often as you'd expect, you'd also have to wait in a huge queue for the visa and a huge queue for immigration. The same could be said for going back to the Thai side. Private cars, on the other hand, were able to get around that. They didn't have to wait for any time. One guy I spoke to said it was his trick when going back into Thailand to politely ask one of the cars at the crossing if they could jump in. More often than not, because the people were so friendly, they would agree. Anyway, 2 hours later, I'm in Laos. Should have taken 10 minutes, but never mind. I went back to the hotel I stayed at on my second night last time. No bookings or anything, just walk in, and they had more than enough rooms available. I only needed one, so that was fine. I didn't know much about the property market in Laos. Could I rent somewhere? Or, if I'm here for 3 months, should I just stay in a hotel? I think that was my error, the one I made in Bangkok. The amount of time I was there, I could have just stayed in a hotel. It might have been a little bit more, but it would have been a lot more convenient. I'd arrived just before midday, and I was excited to go back to the bar I went to the first time, on that first day. It wasn't too far from the hotel, and I just went into relax mode and enjoyed myself for the rest of the day. It was my plan to work on my little project in the daytime and experience different bars and restaurants around Vientiane. When I was back in Thailand, I was interested in dating. I went on some dates with a few Thai girls. On a few occasions things went further, on others they didn't, and I was hoping to do exactly the same thing in Laos. It was my 7th day in Laos. I know because that was when I paid for an extra month in my hotel. And I was in a small restaurant a bit of a walk away from downtown. I was in Explore Road, taking a few days off my project, and I walked for a few hours in a particular direction. The restaurant wasn't much, local Laotian food. I found it was really delicious, somewhat comparable to Thai, but with its own unique charms. I feel bad for all the guys who don't enjoy this type of food, because if you do, it really makes your time so much more affordable than if you feel like you need to eat Western food all the time. But the food was only a small part of what made that restaurant great. The girl that served me, a local from Laos, was just my type. When she started speaking to me in English, I couldn't believe it. This wasn't a tourist bar, or a tourist restaurant, or even close to a tourist area. Not that tourism was very popular in Laos, but she was studying English at university, and this was her part-time job that she did for a little bit of extra money. 20 years old, 4 years younger than me, and because she started speaking in English with me, I ended up not leaving that little restaurant and having quite a few beers there for the rest of the day, getting every chance I can to speak with her, trying to get her to sit down and have a drink. Obviously it wasn't that type of place, but I asked her how she would feel about going on a date with me in the evening. She said unfortunately she couldn't, because she had to work all day. I said, what about tomorrow? She said, I've got to work all day then too. What about the day after? She looked at me, and I think she was deciding if she actually wanted to go on a date with me, but she said yes, the day after I'm free. I had my phone, but they only had a Thai SIM card in it. That didn't work in Laos, and I hadn't yet bothered to try and get a new SIM card. This was before smartphones, but I told her I would come back and meet her there in 3 days' time, and she said it was fine, and I walked back to my hotel. I spent the next 2 days working on my project. I felt like there was no point going out and seeing things because I wanted to save that experience for when I went on the date. When the day came, I was feeling nervous. What happens if I went all that way and she wasn't even there? It's not like I could tell the owner of the restaurant to go and call her and bring her here. But I went anyway, hoping she would be there. She was. She was sitting down at one of the tables and her face lit up when she saw me. She said she didn't expect me to show up, but she lived close by, so it wasn't much of an effort for her to go. I looked at her and said there was no way I was going to miss this. I tried to hide the fact that I was dripping with sweat because I'd walked all the way from my hotel, but that was just part of being there. You can't get away from the heat. Her name was Pulam. She was everything I looked for in a girl. Everything. We went that evening to that French restaurant that I went to before. She had a motorbike, so we went on that. We couldn't have walked all that way, and there's no way I would have wanted her to walk. I loved walking, but you never know how other people feel about walking in such heat. We had a great meal, and after that we went to the same bar along the riverside and had some drinks. We talked for hours, getting to know each other, and I liked her, and I could tell that she liked me. I didn't want to come across as being too forward or too eager, so I asked her, when it was getting quite late, if she'd like to go on another date with me soon. I told her I planned to be in Laos for as much as 9 months. That would involve a lot of leaving and entering and getting different tourist visas, but when you know you're not going to be there permanently, you didn't feel like it mattered. She said she'd love to go on another date. She was working for the following 2 days, but she said the day after was her day off. It was lucky that the university was closed for the yearly holiday. That worked to my advantage in the sense that she didn't have to go to university when it was her day off. This time we arranged to meet somewhere different. She said she didn't want me walking all the way again. Not that I minded, but she said she'd come and meet me at this bar at 6 p.m. in 3 days' time. She left on her bike and went home, I guess, and I went back to the hotel feeling like I'd had a really great date and I wanted to get to know her more. Why is it that an hour is an hour, but when you're waiting for something to happen that you really want to happen, that hour feels too long? But when you're doing something you really enjoy, that hour goes by immediately, way too fast. Those 2 days felt like 2 weeks while I was waiting for that second date. I tried to bury myself in my little project, but I couldn't concentrate. I was just thinking about Pulam. So I just spent those 2 days soaking in the culture, going to some temples, and learning more about Vientiane. When the day that I was going to be meeting her finally arrived, I just patiently waited for the time to come round and left my hotel and got to the bar at 5:30. She wasn't there yet, but I got a good table with a perfect view of the river, and she got there at 6, just as promised. She looked even more beautiful than the first time. I don't know what it is about girls from this part of the world, Laos and Thailand, but you just can't beat them, and she was a perfect example. She sat down and ordered a drink. I'd held off ordering until she got there, but we both had a beer and just chatted. It was like we'd not spent any time apart. Wonderful. And a few hours later, we went for something to eat. She chose the restaurant this time. It was a fantastic place for Laotian food, and we had a feast. We went to another bar that was close by for some more drinks, and we were just talking and talking. When we noticed it was 11, all I wanted to do was say, "Do you want to go to my hotel?" But I didn't know how to say that. In Thailand, In certain situations, it's very easy, because you know what's what. Here I had no idea, but I asked her if she could give me a lift on the bike to the hotel. She said by all means, and I got on the back. And when we got there, I used all my courage and said, "Would you like to come up?" She smiled, as though she was thinking, and said, "Okay." That was great. We thought we'd go and get some more drinks from the local shop. We looked at the bike, should we go on that, or should we just walk? It was only a 5-minute walk, so we decided to do that. As you can imagine, I'm very happy. I really liked this girl, and it wasn't just that I liked her, I wanted to spend more time with her and get to know her even more, and the fact that she seemed to like me was great. When we were walking to the shop, I can remember walking past a few policemen and not thinking anything of it. Nothing whatsoever. I was just in my own world with her, and we went to get some beers from the shop. We got some crisps as well as some snacks and walked back to the hotel. Again, I distinctly remember walking past those policemen. I think I even nodded my head and said hi or something, just trying to be polite. I didn't know what the repercussions of walking past those policemen would mean. A few minutes later, we're walking up the steps to the room in the hotel. There was no elevator in the hotel, and I was up on the 3rd floor. Wasn't much of an issue, but I would dread to think what you'd do if you arrived at the hotel in a wheelchair. You wouldn't be able to go up to the room. We get to the room, go inside, put the beers in the fridge, open one each, and sit down on the sofa. All I want to say is, we did have a great time, but a few hours later, there's a knock at the door. I thought it must be the hotel reception, or even the cleaning lady, but why were they knocking so late? No idea what to think about it, but when I opened the door, those 3 policemen barged into the room. I was taken aback. I thought there must be some kind of error. I thought they had the wrong room, and I asked what they were doing. Pulam looked absolutely terrified, and they were speaking to her in Lao. I was trying to get out of her what they were saying, but she was too flustered to be able to speak to me. I'm continuously asking her and the policeman what's going on, what is the problem. I tried to say I've not done anything wrong, and in very broken English, one of the policemen finally spoke to me. "You no marry, big problem, Lao." Surely he wasn't being serious. But then again, "You no marry, big problems, Lao." They were interrogating her. She was in tears, and it was a nightmare like no other. 5 minutes later, the talking calmed down. I thought at worst I'm going to have to hand over maybe 1,000 baht. I only had that at that point in my wallet, and the rest of the cash I had was in my bag, but it only amounted to a few $100s. The small amount of kip I had that I received in change was basically nothing. So, give them 1,000 baht and they'll be on their way. But when they proceeded to put me in handcuffs and led me out of the room and drove me to the police station, I was really starting to panic. They took her as well, but they separated us, and eventually, after spending what must have been 3 or 4 hours sitting in a cell in this godforsaken jail in Laos, a policeman arrived who actually spoke some English, and I finally learned what had happened. He explained to me that in Laos, it was illegal for foreigners and citizens of Laos to be in a relationship unless they were married. He said that that was a law in place to prevent this, and you're going to have to go to court. And there's a chance you're going to spend some time in jail. When he said that, I nearly died. My heart was racing faster than it's ever raced, and the policeman could tell I was really worried. I had no idea that such a thing would even be real, but it turns out it was. I was in handcuffs, being interrogated by a policeman. I knew where I was. I knew that there was always a possibility to be able to buy your way out of a problem. The problem was, though, how much was it going to cost to get out of this? I can remember saying to him that I had no idea that this law existed. I think I told him I needed to go back home soon because someone in my family was getting married. I made up some ridiculous excuse. I told him I need to get out of this, what can I do? He kept saying no can do, you have to go to court, and then from there, they will decide what the punishment would be. It could be jail, or a big fine, or it could be both. I begged with him, please let me sort it out. I have to go home soon. My family would never forgive me for missing this wedding, or whatever else it was that I was coming up with to try to get out of it. It must have been 10 or 15 minutes that he was in there, and when he eventually stood up and walked out, I was already sobbing uncontrollably. He came back in 30 minutes. Why he had to leave it so long, I don't know, but I remember looking at my watch and the second hand was ticking by so slowly. He said he's looked into my history. He said you've got no record of doing anything wrong in Laos before, so you should be able to get away with paying a $3,000 fine. He made it perfectly clear that this wasn't an actual fine, it was just to share around the policemen. I had that money, but how was I going to get hold of it? That was a big problem. It was very easy to send money into Thailand, but back then, in Laos, getting money into the country, unless you brought cash in, it was very complicated. I didn't have a bank account there. I had my ATM card, but that was when there were hardly any ATMs in the whole country. Plus, I couldn't take out all $3,000 at once. I told him I would happily pay it, but I'm not sure how I'm going to get hold of all that money. He said that was not really his problem. If I wanted to get out of it without having to go to court, it was going to cost me $3,000. That felt too much. Why didn't the policeman in the room just shake me down for everything in my pocket? That's what I felt like should have done. Maybe she had said something to them and that made them react the way they did. That's when I remembered about her. I asked what had happened to her, and they said if I paid this $3,000 she'd be okay as well. I tried to explain to them that that money was sitting in my bank in my own country. Getting hold of it would be difficult. I asked him how long I had to get the money. He said he needed it immediately. When I asked him how was I meant to do that, I think he understood that it was difficult. I had the equivalent of $200 in cash, that bit in my wallet and the bit in my bag in the room, and I had my personal belongings, and there was no way for me to get the money straight away. I said, I can give you my watch as a deposit, and I'll try to get the money as soon as I can. I'll leave my passport as well with you, so I can't leave, and I'll get you the money. I was hoping that he wouldn't understand that my watch was only worth about $10. I was trying to blag it. I didn't know what else to do and I was desperate. I assumed that he wouldn't have a deep knowledge of watches, but he said, give me all the money in your wallet, your passport, and you don't need to give me the watch, and you've got 3 days to come up with the $3,000. When I was walking out of the police station, I had a huge sense of relief. Pulam came out 5 minutes after, and she said she was so sorry. I asked her if she was aware of that law, and she said yes, but she didn't think anything would actually happen. She said she'd heard stories of people having issues, but it was very rare. She said she was so sorry, but I don't think it was really her fault. Should I have known what the law was in Laos? Maybe I should, but why would you think something like that was a law? I called my parents immediately, saying I needed this money as it's an emergency, and as soon as I returned home, I would give them the money out of my account. They said they would, and that was fine, but how were they going to send it? There was no bank account to send it to, and I don't think Western Union was in Laos then. I then had the idea. Although there weren't many ATMs, there were a few, and while I hadn't used one as of yet, I could try. If I took out as much as I could, and I took a cash advance from my credit card, if I did that every day for 3 days, I should just about have enough money. I prayed I would, and I went straight to the first ATM I could find, which took me over an hour. They'd only just started putting ATMs in Laos at that point, so that was lucky. When I put the card in, it didn't work, so I had to find a phone to call my bank to inform them that I was trying to use the ATM in Laos. I hadn't used it in Laos before, only in Thailand. I took a lot of cash with me because of this very problem. But then my card worked after speaking with the bank and I took out the maximum. I took the maximum cash advance I could and I did the same for the next 2 days and I had the equivalent of just over $3,000. I met up with Pulam because she had to go back with me to pay the fine. She was still looking really upset and scared. I felt so sorry for her as well, but we got to the police station, paid the fine and my passport was returned. I still really liked her. I wanted to go back with her to the hotel. I wanted to go out and eat with her, go to drink. But instead, we just hugged and said goodbye. Never saw or spoke to her again. I then went back to my hotel, packed everything into my bag and went back to Thailand immediately. When I was in Thailand, I called my parents and told them what happened, told them not to worry. It's okay, just a strange law in Laos. But I was elated that I'd made it to Thailand and I'd got out of that. From then, I looked into the law and it indeed was real. Who would have thought that was real though? I don't know. I've heard other people having far worse things happen, and some just managed to bribe the policeman that caught them. But unfortunately, that didn't work for me. It was an experience. I went to Bangkok, but I didn't much feel like staying there anymore, so I went home. I was lucky that the little project I was talking about turned into something good. I moved to Thailand full-time 2 years ago, living in Khon Kaen. Throughout the years I met and married my wife, and we're living in my Thai wife's house there. And it's a fantastic existence. I'm retired and I love it, but I will always remember that experience in Laos. Be careful, because I think that law is still a thing. Not sure if it's as strict as it used to be, but just be careful.